everyone, I'm Professor Casey, and today I'm going to show you how to download text files, use them in File.io, and download the outline like you would use it on an exam. So you can be able to use text files, download them, store them into arrays, and I'm going to show you how to do that inside a function. But I've had a lot of people request a video like this, so I thought I would make one before you take your practicums the next couple days. All right, so the first things first, we open code blocks. We're going to make a project. Oops. And this will look just like you've done it before a bunch of times. Okay, and then you're probably going to save this in your W drive. I am not on my W drive right now, so I need to save it in my C drive. Okay, make sure that's exactly where you want to save it, and then hit next. Looks like my toolbar went away, so I just go to View, make sure I'm in default, and then hit the manager. Okay. And it gives me my main file. I know this is the file I'm actually editing inside my project. Okay, assuming the exam has now started, you can then go to Blackboard. I've made this example text file and outline for you. They don't really mean anything, they're just random stuff, but yours would actually have a description with it. You're going to right click and then hit Save Link As. So that's a right click on the name and then Save Link As. Now I need to save that in the exact same place I just saved everything else, which for me is in my C folder. And inside this example, that's where my main C file is, the one I'm actually editing to compile. And I've already downloaded that once, so I added a 1 there, so I'm going to take that away and save. Okay? And I'm going to do the exact same thing with the outline. And assuming you did everything right, it should open the same place for you. But just to double check, just to make sure everything is good, what I can do is I can click this arrow and then hit Show in Folder, and it will open that folder and show me everything that's there. So I can see my CodeBlocks project, my main file that I'm editing, the outline, and my text file are all in the same place, and this is great. Okay, so now I'm going to leave this up just so I can monitor that everything's good. Go back to CodeBlocks. I'm going to just open a file, and I'm going to go to where I just saved that outline and open this. Now remember, this isn't the one that you're actually compiling, you're compiling main. So all we're going to do here is copy and paste this in. You can copy and paste by chunks if you want to. I just copy and paste the whole thing. I build it just to make sure everything's saved. You may get some errors and stuff, that's okay. And then you're going to close out the outline just so you don't get confused. Okay, so I can see I have to put my header in. Obviously, you know how to do that. I'm not going to do that for you. I can see there's a function prototype here called getFile. This is where we're going to read the file in. Have a couple arrays declared for me, some variables, and a function here called readFile or getFile. The next thing I want to do is go into that text file and see what it looks like. So I can look and I can see, okay, I'm going to be reading in 2 separate arrays. One looks like it's a char type, and one looks like it's an int. I can tell from how long this is that this is only 10 lines, but we don't want to assume we know we'll always be reading in the same file. So usually in the outline, like it is here, you can see that they've told you it will never be more than 100. So we won't declare it based on the number in here. We'll just declare it based on 100, and then we'll only repeat it for how long it actually is. Okay, so the first thing I need to do is be able to make my function for getting the file. So I know I'm going to have probably a char array, and that one's first, and then I'm going to have an int array. I'm going to call this letter and number. Okay, and then I'm probably going to want to return an int because usually when you read in a file from a function, you want to return how long that file is. Okay, so I'm going to be reading these two in. Now here, I'm actually going to change that data type to match, and I'll change the name just so they're not the same in each one. All right, so now I have my function prototype all set. This will probably be given to you fully in the outline, but just in case it's not, that's how you write that. Here I have two arrays to be able to catch it. They're declared as max size because I know I may not always read in the same file. I have a variable for file length. This is what I'll return to when I know how long each of the arrays are. And I have a counter variable just declared here. So how I'll actually call the function will be, I want to catch what it returns in file length. And then I actually want to call the function, which I called getFile. Now, what I want to send down, remember when you do a file, you read stuff in from a file and you're using arrays. Arrays always use call by reference. Oh my goodness, what? And no. Which means I just need to send down the address of where the array starts. And since arrays are by definition pointers, we get just the name of the array, and that's the same thing as sending down the address. Okay, I'll come back and print this out in a second. I'm going to fill in my actual function first. So file length equals getFile. So this is going to run the getFile function. It's going to jump down, read it in, scan everything in, and then it's going to return whatever I tell it to. Hopefully that will be the length of the file. So actually I should call that getFile to match. And I have my nice header here for all my functions. You can use this for every single function that you make if you'd like. All right, so first things first, I need to fill in the parentheses here for my inputs for my function, and I can look back. I'm just going to copy and paste this. It makes it easy. It's going to look exactly like my function prototype with letter and number being the files that we're reading in. So the first thing I need to do is to declare my file pointer and declare some sort of counter variable. So I'll do the counter variable first because that's easy. And then if you remember how to declare a file pointer, it's file star, and then usually it starts with FP, and then because this is an input, I'm going to call it IN, FPIN. All right, then we need to open the file, and because we're reading something in, we're going to check and see that it exists. So I set my file pointer, equal to the function fopen. And then inside, you can see it pops up for me here. I have to put the name of the file. And if I remember right, that's called textexample.txt. Make sure you get your capital letters right there. A comma, and then whatever mode I want to do for my file, so I'm going to read it in. Okay. And then I need to make sure that that file exists because I opened it in read mode. If I opened it in write mode, I don't necessarily have to do that. So if FPIN is null, if the file pointer didn't read in properly, I'm going to print out a message. Something like file not found. And then I'm going to use the command exit. And that will close the program. Okay, so we've opened the file, we've checked to see if it exists, hopefully it will work. Next step is we need to scan in the file, and this is that for loop that we used in the File.io lecture. There's a couple different ways you could scan it in. My favorite, and by far the most common, is the for loop. I used I as my counter up here, and then the condition for the for loop is actually very interesting. This is where we're actually going to do our scan. So this is the condition, the fscanf, and we're going to check and see if this equals end of file. So fscanf, and the first thing you have to put after fscanf is the file pointer, so that's FPIN. Then we need to put whatever we're actually scanning in. Now, if I look back at my text file, I know I'm scanning a char first and then an int. But you could use whatever you wanted. This could be a string and a double. This could be whatever. Just use the right placeholders. So I'm reading a char first and then an int. Okay, and then I need to tell it where to save those things. Now remember, with scanf, you still have to use the ampersand even for arrays. So I called this letter, and I'm going to use that with my counter variable I so that this increments every single time. And number, and we do the same thing. Oops. Oh my goodness. All right. So now we need to see if that entire thing, fscanf of fpin, scanning in C and D, is equal to end of file. So we need to check and see if all of this, these scans that we're doing, are equal to the end of file. And we're going to keep looping until this is equal to the end of file. That's why we have that not equal there. And lastly, you know what to do for a for loop is just plus plus. Now, because we're doing our condition in our scan and as our condition, we're actually not going to put anything inside the for loop. This is just going to loop in here until it's done. We don't have anything else we need to do. Okay, so that should scan everything in. If you wanted to do a troubleshooting, you could print it out inside the file here just to make sure that it was working properly. I'm fairly confident that this will work, so I'm going to just leave it at that. And then the last thing we have to do is close the file. And we close it using the file pointer as it says here, so fpin. All right, and then the very last thing we need to do when we're reading in a file is we need to return how long it is. Now you could put inside this for loop a counter variable and increase it every time, but it will end up being the same as this counter variable that you're already using. So we're just going to return I as our counter, and then that will, when we run the function, come up here, be stored in file length. And we can use that then for all the rest of our loops. Okay, so looking over, declared our file pointer and our counter, we opened the file, we checked to see if it existed, we scan in the data, we close the file, and we return whatever we need to return. So I'm going to build this. Unused variable I, that's in main, so that's okay. Warning, variable file length is set but not used up here. And that's just because I haven't printed it out. So let me add a printf here. Okay. And I'll rebuild that. Okay. Unused variable I, that's fine. I'll fix that in just a second. So let's go ahead and run this and make sure that it works. Now, we can see, okay, the file length is 19. Okay, so I have something returned for file length. That means I can print out my arrays and check and see if it's working properly. So I do that with a for loop. I have my counter variable I here. Now I returned this file length variable, so I'm going to use that as long as I is less than the file length. Then I'm going to increase I. And I'll just print out each of those arrays. So we're going to print out a %C. And then usually I like to tab them apart, just looks nicer. Followed by a %D. And those are called let and num in main here. So let I followed by num I. All right. I still have that open. I'm also going to add a new line here just so we can separate things out, and a new line here so that is nicely formatted. Okay. So let's go ahead and build that, make sure we don't have any errors or warnings, and give it a run. Okay, so as you can see, there's some weird stuff happening here. Not only do I know that my file length isn't 19, because I can see in the file that it's 10, but I'm also getting some really, really weird print things here. I have a letter and a number, and that looks fine, but then I have no letter and a really, really big number. And that is the case for all of these, and these numbers seem to be very random. They have no order. So, if I think about why that's happening, could you tell me? All right. So if you remember, whenever we have characters being scanned in, they're always a little bit weird and fussy. And so what we have to do is either we need to clear the buffer using fflush inside this for loop every single time, or we need to put a space there to ignore the new line at the end of each of these lines here. It's reading in the character as the new line, and then it has nothing to scan for the int on the next line, which is why this is getting so messed up, and it's why it thought there was double the number of lines than there were. All right, so if we put a space here in our scan, and we rebuild, and we rerun, we get the correct file length and the correct printout of our arrays. All right, so this really isn't too difficult. You're going to get your file, set it up as a function. You can do it in main if you want to, but most of the time we'll do it in a function. Make sure you're sending down whatever number of arrays that you need. This could be 2 or 3 or 5, and make sure they're declared correctly, right? I'm reading in chars and ints, but you could be reading in strings and doubles, or strings, ints, and doubles, or whatever. Make sure you have them declared differently as different names inside main, and that when you run the file, you're sending down just the names of those arrays because it sends down the address. When you go down to your function, you need to declare your file pointer, open the file, open it correctly, save, check and see if the file pointer exists, scan in all the data, close the file, and return the file length. Now, making sure when you do that, that your text file is saved in the right spot, making sure that everything is in here. Now you'll see I have some new folders in my file folder here for my project. That's fine. You should never open these, right? Bin and object files. If you wanted to add an object file, you could, but we haven't really talked about that in this class. So you should never have your text file be in any of these folders. The main file that you're compiling and the text file need to be able to see each other. These should be in the exact same file. All right, hopefully that helps clear things up for you. Thanks for listening to me today, and hopefully you learned a little bit about how to read in files from functions using arrays.